a fun little thing on myth busting. So we have a couple questions that we're going to ask revolving around questions that people have had on whether things work or not. So for our first one, we have Tanya Cheeke with WSU, and she'll be kind of answering, are mycorrhizal inoculants a silver bullet for sustainable agriculture? 5 minutes, go.
All right, thank you. Okay, so mycorrhizal fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, and they can help improve plant growth and nutrient uptake, primarily because of the relationship they have with plant roots, that they can really expand the surface area of the root system. Here's a little tree seedling without mycorrhizal fungi, and here's a little tree seedling with mycorrhizal fungi. And so you can see the vast expansion of the root system by engaging in the symbiosis. You often see these really incredible results that are posted, big plant, little plant studies. This plant has fungi, this plant does not. Fungi are great for plants. And we also know that management practices can disturb naturally occurring mycorrhizal communities in soil. So things like tillage, pesticides, what plant was planted before there, all of these can impact the mycorrhizal communities in the soil. So a lot of growers are interested in using mycorrhizal fungi in their management system to see if it'll help promote plant growth. This has led to an emerging market of these mycorrhizal inoculant products, sometimes called biostimulants, bioinoculants, and biofertilizers. And they contain products that are, or they contain organisms that are supposed to promote the growth of plants. And sometimes these work. So there is evidence of benefits of some of these products in ecological restorations, greenhouse studies, nursery studies, and field studies. But it turns out that the results are actually quite variable. And it depends on the plant species that you're using, sometimes even the plant cultivar, the particular growing conditions of the plant, and even the source and composition of the inoculant products. So if you buy one of these products from a home store or garden store and use it in your crops, will it work? Well, it depends on the plant. And so the plants have a whole range of growth responses to mycorrhizal fungi. Some exhibit a really strong benefit to mycorrhizal fungi. So an example here would be grapevines. Some plants have either low or no benefit from being inoculated. So an example here would be cheatgrass. Sometimes it even grows worse when you add mycorrhizal fungi to the soil. And there are some plants that have lost their association with mycorrhizal fungi over evolutionary time. So things in the Brassicaceae, like broccoli and cauliflower, there would be no point of inoculating them because they don't form these associations. So some plant species benefit more from mycorrhizal fungi than others. So it's not going to affect all plants the same way. We also know that inoculants work best in low nutrient soils. Here's a study, or here's some data from a study that one of my grad students did, looking at mycorrhizal colonization levels in roots of grapevines, Chardonnay and Merlot. And when no fertilizer was added to the pots, the plants had over 75% mycorrhizal colonization. When phosphorus fertilizer was added to the pots, colonization went way down. So it went down to less than 25% colonized. So soil nutrients also play an important part in the symbiosis. We also know that mycorrhizal colonization and effects on plant growth vary among inoculant products. These different inoculants contain different numbers of species, different types of fungi, different species of fungi, different compositions. So depending on what is in the formula, you can get a whole variety of effects. Most research has been showing that locally sourced inoculants tend to work better than some of these commercially produced inoculants. And this is because maybe some of the locally sourced inocula might be better adapted to the local growing conditions than something you might buy off the internet and bring in from another state, for example. So are mycorrhizal inoculants a silver bullet? Well, I wouldn't say that they're a silver bullet. They can help some plants grow under certain conditions. So the outcomes of these inoculations depend on what plant species or even plant cultivar that you're growing, the mycorrhizal species that you're using or the community that you're using, the soil nutrient availability, and even the source of the fungi can be important. So what we recommend is that if people are interested in incorporating mycorrhizal inoculant products into their management plans, that you conduct small scale studies using your particular plant species of interest, the inoculant or inoculants of interest that you might be using, and planting them in pots, for example, with the background field soil that they would be planted in the field. And then what you can do is measure plant growth over time. So that way you can determine whether that particular inoculant product will have any benefit for your particular plant under these particular soil conditions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll hold all questions till the end. So up next is Markus Kelle with Washington State University, asking, and you can sit or stand if you'd like, is should you water stress plants past aeration? Yes, no, that's for the online. Yep, the
I
online.
can't hear it.
Exactly.
I'm assuming you can all hear me. So myth busting. So if I'm supposed to bust the myth, there must be some kind of a myth, right? Okay, so what's the myth about irrigating past aeration? How many of you are grape growers? So you know, some of you know what aeration even means, right? Okay, so we're talking about irrigating during grape ripening. Probably the same thing applies to apples and other crops as well. And the myth involved, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, things won't ripen.
All right, like too much water, ripening essentially stops, or you're diluting quality of the grapes. That's usually the myth behind irrigating past aeration. So much so that, for example, in France, it's illegal to irrigate after August 15th. I have no idea where also. That's for vineyards. In Switzerland, thou shall not irrigate during ripening, basically. So in Europe, it's written into the law, and here many wineries tell the growers don't irrigate during ripening, or very little because you're diluting the quality of the ones. So we've looked into this. First of all, looking at some crops in the vineyard, measuring leaf water status, the pressure bomb, water potential, and so on. And we're looking at pre-verisol, so before ripening starts, and then during ripening. How does the leaf water status correlate with the final size of the grape berry? And the final size is what this is all about. If the size gets too big, then you have a dilution effect. We found that the more water you apply before ripening starts, the bigger the berry gets. So if you want big fruit, put a lot of water on the soil early during the growing season before ripening starts. If you want to minimize fruit size, which many red wine makers do, then apply less water before ripening starts. Absolutely no relationship between amount of water applied and plant water status during the ripening phase and berry size at the end of the season. So that was the first point. And then we thought, all right, we can do better than this. So we constructed these big pressure vessels based on boilers and put potted vines inside these pressure vessels, put a lot of water on these potted grapevines, and then pressurized the roots at 10 bar. That's more pressure than you have in your pickup tubs. So a lot of pressure on these roots to the point that water will be running out of the leaf margins, and we're putting a video camera like that on the clusters of these grapes because we were going to film how these berries would explode. And I could now show you about 2 hours of the world's most boring video. Nothing, it was terrible after that. So grape berries, like other fruit, their skin during ripening becomes very stiff. They will allow a little bit, they will accommodate a little bit of expansion that's associated with the ripening process, but they will not allow expansion associated with too much water moving into the fruit. The water does not move from the roots directly to the fruit. What we found is the water moves to the leaves, it's used to make sugar in the leaves, and then along with the sugar moves to the fruit, so you get more sugar in the fruit if you add more water. So instead of having a dilution effect, we're having the opposite. We're having these plants produce more sugar and adding more sugar into the fruit. So I think my time is basically up. What we found in this research is there's no effect of post-berries on ripening applied water and berry size of ripening. So now I'm going to have to be able to fly to France and tell them to turn the water on after August 15th. And for you, if you're winemakers, don't tell your growers, please, not to irrigate after berries are during ripening, because that's bad for fruit quality and it's bad for survival of the plant the next year. And I do not have any data on apples or any other crops, but I'm pretty sure that it probably works exactly the same way. Thanks.
Awesome, mic drop, thank you. Yep, nope, that was great. You have 1 minute to spare. Next one is Catherine Jones with Wilbur Ellis and talking about do cover crops compete for resources?
So that's our myth, right? If we plant cover crops under the vine row or even in the drag row, it's gonna suck up all the water that we put on our vines. So that depends on what the research shows. It depends on where you are. Depends on how much moisture you have available. And it depends on what cover crop you're using. So there's research that's happened in the US. A lot of it's on the East Coast, kind of Midwest area, where they have a lot of natural precipitation when we don't here in Eastern Washington. Their soils are a lot heavier than ours. They have a lot more clay. So when they do plant cover crops in season that are intended to grow in season along with the vine, they do pull resources from those vines. Those they do intentionally though, because they have a lot harder time controlling vine vigor there. So when you have soils with a lot of water in them and a lot of clay, a lot of nutrition, natural nutrition in those soils, if you're planting something like a fescue, a grass type of cover crop, then yes, it will naturally pull water out of the soil that we don't want to go to the vine. And with that, it is pulling nutrition because we know water moves nutrients from the soil in the plant. There's really not any research that's been done in Washington, at least that I could find. But we've got Devin with this great vineyard project who's going to show us Washington data. But for now, what we have is some data out of Australia. They have more similar growing conditions in Australia than on the East Coast of the United States. So when we look at things that they've done in Australia, they've actually found good luck planting under the vine row, doing a medic ryegrass mix and planting that in the fall. It uses winter precipitation. It's crazy reading those research papers though, because they say plant in April. And so then they're planting in the fall. And then that cover crop grows over the winter. It's using natural precipitation, it's using rain to grow. It establishes great. And then it dies in the spring when the grapevines start growing. And then it forms, as it dies, it falls over and it forms this weed barrier, which is great because then they're not having to spray so much herbicide. One of the research papers that I read said that they saved $1,600 a hectare on herbicide costs. So for them, I mean, it was a huge benefit sustainably. It was a huge benefit for them. They didn't have that cost of herbicide. They replicated that experiment on a vineyard that was further inland that probably matched our environment a little better. They did have to reseed that cover crop a couple years in a row in order to get it to establish well enough to be able to cover, like not have or have that weed barrier, and then to have the seed germination each year to replant itself. But they found that the cover crop using that medic ryegrass blend did add some nitrogen to the soil. It didn't compete with the vines for water. They found that there wasn't a difference in terms of phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium. Not significant difference, I should say. And they did see that the yan increased. And I know we've talked about yan a little bit. That's really important to winemakers and grape growers. And that they figured increased due to the release of nitrogen in season because of that legume crop, the medic. I have not seen, and maybe Marcus has, I haven't seen any data on yan numbers on the East Coast. My guess would be because they're planting that cover crop to devigorate the vineyard, that would potentially decrease the yan. And then in Australia, I mean, they weren't seeing that competition for nutrition resources and water. But when you think about it, they're growing their cover crop in the wintertime. It's dead in the summertime. So big thing to think about with cover crops is when is it growing? Because that's really going to impact whether it's taking resources from your vine or not.
Exactly 5 minutes. Perfect, wonderful, thank you. All right, last up is Troy Peters with Washington State University saying, does wetter water make fatter wallets?
Okay, and I'm gonna stand just so that everybody can see me in the corner here. So a lot of soil surfactants are sold as soil wetting agents. And it's supposed to increase your soil's infiltration rate, your soil's water holding capacity, your drainage rate too. And you know, some of those are kind of contradictory. And then and just basically help you get better yields. And then the question is, does it really help? And just like everybody else here said, it depends. So let me tell you a little bit about, so water is a polar molecule, right? It has H2O, the 2 hydrogen are on one side of that oxygen molecule. It makes it have a positive side and a negative side, which means that water molecules like to stick together, which is why water coalesces into drops, why it hangs onto the tip of your finger, and it just kind of, and then it sticks to other water molecules. And it also likes to stick to other nonpolar surfaces like a soil particle. So it grabs onto the soil particle and then it's grabbing onto its buddies and it's pulling them in. And this is how soil hangs on the water. Just like a rag, you can make water flow uphill into a dry rag because it's grabbing onto the fiber particles of the rag, and then it's pulling the other molecules up, and you can sop up the water off the counter with the dry rag. Same principle. In order for this to work, you need that cohesion between the water molecules, the adhesion of the water molecule to the soil particles, in order for that to work right. So what happens is soil particles can get organic coatings on them. And then these organic coatings can be hydrophobic. Waterphobic means hate, right? So it doesn't like, and it's just like wax paper. You put water droplets on wax paper, it beads up and it doesn't want to stick to it. And so when that happens with a hydrophobic soil, then the water doesn't go into it and it creates all these problems. The water will kind of go down in fingers, and it just doesn't like to spread and adhere to the soil and sop up into the soil. And in these cases, the soil surfactant, which is basically a water molecule, it's a molecule that has a hydrophilic side that hangs onto the water, and it has also a non-polar side that grabs onto the organic coatings, and it can really help a soil to hold on to water. And so these organic coatings, so soils that have these problems, these hydrophobic problems, many of us have seen them, and they happen especially like in flower beds and stuff where the soil is powdery dry, and you sprinkle water on there and you see it beat up like this. So that's a hydrophobic soil. In this case, having a soil surfactant, and that would really help that condition. So the question is, does it always help? And that is where it depends. And so what we did is we did some tests on just normal agricultural soils that we gathered from the region around here, and we tested the infiltration rate with and without of a variety of these different soil surfactants, unsaturated hydraulic conductivity, and then the water holding capacity. And when we're just using normal soils, we couldn't tell any statistical difference because the soil did not have that hydrophobic character. So if you have normal soils that aren't hydrophobic, then we couldn't tell there was any difference in that case. So how do you know if your soil is hydrophobic? It's pretty easy. You take some air dried soil in your hand, sprinkle some water droplets from your irrigation system, and if it beads up and it doesn't go into your soil, you have hydrophobic soils. In this case, it probably would help you. But if it just goes into the soil immediately, then I probably would not spend my money on soil surfactants.
Awesome. With that, we can now take questions. Question.
Just a question for the last speaker here. So tailoring the surfactant to the soil makes perfect sense to me, but then there are some products, Movento, for example, that recommends you use a soil surfactant when applying it to the soil. And did you take into account that the product itself may have chemical properties that does that change the equation? at
So
all?
the question is, and this also happens with different types of pesticides. They recommend that you use a soil surfactant with it. Usually they're for pesticides that are applied to foliar, because foliar leaves have this natural hydrophobicity. And so when you use a surfactant, it helps that chemical spread out across the leaf and go into it. And I am not a soil chemist as to what the different molecules that are happening within that particular chemical. If it says use our chemical and they say use this one, then I would be suspicious. But if they say use any soil surfactant, then they probably do that.
You think there's an issue with years of spraying foliar surfactants with pesticides is building up in the soil? So I know over the years, there's quite a bit of surfactants put on trees. Is that a compound that can combine with the soil and make it hydrophobic over time, or possibility?
Yeah, so the question is whether, because they do spray a lot, right? They use surfactants on a lot of these sprays, whether that builds up in the soil. And I'm not a chemist, but I know that most of these molecules break down pretty quickly over time. So but I can't say.
On that experiment that you did where you pressurized the roots to grapes, sorry, did you see water actually get like pushed out of the leaves? I know you said not the fruits, but the leaf out of the leaves.
Yeah, it ran out of the, oh, sorry. So, am I repeating the question? So the question was whether water runs out of the leaves when you pressurize the roots. And it does, and it gushed out of the leaves in these cases. Just not out of the berry. We had in the whole experiment, I think we had 2 berries that split open in the entire plant, and it was just like a little bit, right? And then nothing happened after that. It's very difficult to change the size of the fruit during the ripening period. Any fruit, you can change the size of the fruit easily during the early fruit development period, and then it becomes almost impossible once it ripens. The skin becomes so stiff. But yeah, that water just gushed out of the fruit.
Oh, interesting, thank you.
Anything else? Great. Well,